The alarm cut through the quiet of the repair dock like a knife. Tom jerked awake from his chair, coffee mug tumbling to the floor. It was 3 in the morning, and nothing good ever happened at 3 in the morning out here on Station 7. He grabbed his jacket and headed toward the landing bay, his boots echoing against the metal floor. What he found stopped him dead in his tracks. A creature lay sprawled across his dock like nothing he'd ever seen before. It was massive, easily the size of a small ship, with scales that caught the light in weird ways like oil floating on water. The thing looked like some twisted mix between a wolf and something from the deepest ocean. Tom's first instinct was to grab his emergency beacon and call for backup. His second instinct was to run. But then he saw the eyes. They were amber-colored, bright with intelligence, and filled with something that cut right through Tom's fear. Desperation. Real, raw desperation. The kind that didn't care about species or biology or how alien this creature was supposed to be. The eyes locked onto his, and in that moment, Tom understood something without words. This thing needed help. Clutched against the creature's chest was something smaller, something that was shaking and convulsing. A young one. A child. Tom moved closer, and his mind started working in a different way now. All the fear got pushed aside by something else, something older and deeper. The instinct to help when something was suffering. "Easy, girl," Tom said softly, keeping his voice low and calm like he was talking to a scared animal. He wasn't sure why he used that tone. Maybe because the creature's energy felt feminine, protective. Maybe because gentle was the only thing that made sense right now. "I'm not going to hurt you." The massive alien didn't attack. That was the thing that struck Tom most. She could have killed him 100 times over, but instead she moved slowly, deliberately, with the kind of care someone uses when they're terrified of breaking something precious. She lowered the small convulsing creature, her young one, Tom realized, onto his workbench, the metal groaning under the weight. Then the mother collapsed beside it, her breathing hard and uneven. Her whole body was shaking, and Tom could see now that she was injured. Deep cuts ran across her side, and that shimmering substance oozing from them wasn't water or hydraulic fluid. It was blood. Alien blood, sure, but blood nonetheless. Tom's mind went into overdrive. A creature this size, this hurt, and she'd managed to get here. She'd managed to find a repair dock on some random station in the middle of nowhere. That meant she knew what this place was. She'd come here deliberately. She'd come here because she was hoping that a human, a complete stranger, might not kill her. That was trust, and Tom wasn't about to waste it. He moved around the bay, his hands already working through the motions before his brain fully caught up. Years of fixing broken ships and damaged equipment had taught him how to stay calm under pressure, how to think on his feet, how to improvise when he didn't have the right tools. This was different, obviously. Way different. But the basic principle was the same. Figure out what's broken, figure out what you have available, and fix it. Tom grabbed his portable scanner, the one he used for diagnostic work on electrical systems. It probably wouldn't even register whatever alien biology this creature had, but it was a starting point. He approached the young one carefully, keeping his movements slow and visible. The mother's head tracked him and her muscles tensed, but she didn't stop him. "Your baby needs help," Tom said, more to himself than to the creature. "And I'm going to help. That's what we do here. We fix things." He ran the scanner over the young one and got readings that made no sense at all. The biology was completely different from anything human, but Tom could see enough to know that this little creature was in serious trouble. Its life signs were weak, flickering like a dying light bulb. Whatever was wrong with it, time was running out. Tom looked at the mother, at those amber eyes still fixed on him, and made a decision. He wasn't going to turn her away. He wasn't going to call for authorities or security or anyone else who might not understand what they were looking at. This was a mother trying to save her child, and she trusted him enough to bring that child here. That meant something. "All right," Tom said, rolling up his sleeves. "Let's see what we can do." He got to work, losing himself in the familiar rhythm of problem-solving and careful repair. Outside the bay windows, the stars looked down on Station 7, oblivious to the fact that something was about to change. Something was about to begin that would ripple outward in ways Tom couldn't possibly imagine. But for now there was just the work. Just a man and his tools and a creature who desperately needed both. 3 days. 72 hours. Tom had lost count of how many times he'd circled back to the same problem, staring at readings that didn't make sense, trying different approaches that mostly just made things worse. He hadn't slept. Hadn't eaten anything real, just coffee and whatever stale protein bars he could find in his locker. His hands were shaking from exhaustion and caffeine, but stopping wasn't an option. The mother, He'd started calling her Nova because of the way her scales seemed to shimmer like distant stars, hadn't left her young one's side for a single second. She watched Tom with an intensity that would have been terrifying if he wasn't too tired to be scared anymore. Every move he made, every tool he picked up, every time he leaned over her offspring, her whole body went rigid. Once, when Tom had to make a small incision to get a proper tissue sample, Nova let out a growl that shook the walls. It was a warning. A threat. But it wasn't a killing blow. She let him keep working. That meant something. It meant she understood on some level that Tom wasn't trying to hurt her child. That whatever he was doing it to save a life, not end one. Tom had rigged together a medical scanner from spare parts, circuit boards from broken navigation systems, sensors from old life support equipment, everything he could salvage from his repair inventory. It wasn't pretty. It looked like something a kid would build in a garage. But it worked. Sort of. Enough to give him real data instead of just guesses. What that data showed him made his stomach drop. The young one had a parasitic infection, something living inside its body, feeding on it from the inside out. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the metabolic collapse happening at the same time. The creature's body was shutting down, system by system, like dominoes falling. It was like watching a ship lose power, except the ship was alive, and it was dying in front of him. Tom had created an 4-drip using hydraulic tubing and sterile saline solution mixed with compounds he was just guessing about. He'd fashioned needles from spare medical supplies scavenged from the station's old emergency kit. It looked ridiculous. It looked impossible. But it was keeping the young one's fluids balanced, at least. Barely. The real work was figuring out what to actually do about the infection. He spent hours at his workbench mixing different compounds, testing theories. Some of it came from actual medical training. Tom had done his share of first aid certification over the years. A lot of it was just instinct and desperation, mixing things and hoping they wouldn't make everything worse. He'd try something, check the readings, see nothing happen, and start over. Around hour 40, Tom realized something. The infection wasn't just parasitic. It was also triggering some kind of allergic reaction in the young one's immune system. The creature's body was fighting back so hard that it was actually killing itself in the process. It was like someone was drowning and thrashing around so much they were going under faster. Tom needed to stop the panic response while fighting the actual infection. And he needed to do both things at the same time without killing the young one in the attempt. No pressure. By hour 55 he found something that looked like it might work. He was mixing it in small batches. Compounds that seemed to calm the immune response mixed with things that he hoped would target the parasite. It was a gamble. A complete shot in the dark. If it worked, maybe the young one would live. If it didn't, he'd just speed up the process. Nova watched him prepare the first injection with those unblinking amber eyes. Tom could feel her tension, her fear, her desperate hope all radiating out at him like heat. He met her gaze for a long moment. "This might not work," he said quietly. "I'm probably going to fail. But I'm trying. That's all I can do." He didn't know if she understood his words. Maybe she understood something else. The tone, the intention, the fact that Tom was laying his own exhaustion and doubt bare in front of her. Maybe that was enough. When he made the first injection into the young one's foreline, Nova started to growl, then stopped. She watched. She waited. She trusted him enough not to tear his head off. By hour 62, the young one's breathing got slightly easier. The convulsions lessened. Tom felt something loosen in his chest. It was working. The cocktail of compounds he'd thrown together was actually working. By hour 72, the young one's vitals had stabilized. Not recovered. Not healed. But stable. Holding on. Fighting. Alive. Tom slumped against the wall and felt tears running down his face. He was too exhausted to even wipe them away. Nova made a soft sound, not a growl this time, something gentler, and Tom knew. She knew he'd done it. Against all odds, in a garage repair dock on a station in the middle of nowhere, a human mechanic and an alien mother had fought off death together. And they'd won. Tom was staring at the blood sample under the makeshift microscope, just a camera hooked up to a magnifying lens, when he saw it. Something he almost missed. Something that changed everything. The young one's condition had stabilized, yeah, but it wasn't getting better. It was just stuck. Hovering between life and death, held up by the 4-drip and the compounds Tom kept adjusting. But it wasn't healing. The parasite was still there, still feeding, still slowly poisoning the creature from the inside out. Tom had bought time, but time was running out again. He needed a real cure, not just a band-aid. That's when he decided to take a risk that probably should have gotten him killed. Tom approached Nova carefully, letting her see every movement he made. He brought out a sterile needle and pointed to her arm, to the place where her scales seemed a little thinner. Nova went completely still, her massive body tense, ready to strike if this was a betrayal. Tom kept his hands visible, kept his movements slow, and tried to project everything he felt, trust, desperation, hope, in his body language. Nova didn't stop him. The needle barely pierced her scales, but the blood that came out was remarkable. It shimmered with that same oily quality as the rest of her body, but under the microscope Tom could see something else. Crystalline structures. Actual crystals embedded in her blood cells, like nothing Tom had ever seen before. They caught the light and refracted it, creating tiny rainbows in the sample. Tom stared at those crystals for a long time. Then it hit him. Those weren't just decorative. Those crystals had to serve a purpose. Her species wouldn't have evolved them unless they meant something. Unless they did something. Tom started running tests, mixing Nova's blood with different compounds, watching how the crystals reacted. Some reactions were neutral. Some were violent. But when Tom mixed her crystalline blood with one of his synthetic antibiotics, a human-made compound designed to fight infections, something magical happened. The crystals started breaking down the parasitic cells, actually destroying them. The human science and the alien biology weren't fighting each other. They were working together. They were perfect complements. Tom had found it. The hybrid treatment. The thing that could actually save the young one. But it was risky. Really risky. He'd only tested it a few times in controlled conditions. Using it on the young one meant injecting something completely untested into a creature that was already hanging on by a thread. If it worked, the young one would live. If it didn't, it would accelerate the death process. It was the biggest gamble of his life. Tom prepared the injection with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. He'd sterilized everything, triple-checked his work, made sure the mixture was exactly right. The syringe looked so small in his trembling fingers, like it couldn't possibly hold something that would decide whether a living thing got to keep breathing or not. Nova approached him. She didn't make any threatening movements. She just came close, her massive head looming over Tom's shoulder, and slowly, carefully, lowered her head until it pressed gently against his shoulder. It was a touch. A gesture. A way of saying, I trust you. Do what you need to do. Tom felt something break open in his chest. This alien creature, this being from who knew where in the galaxy, was putting her complete faith in him. Her child's life was in his hands, and she was pressing her head against his shoulder like they were old friends. Like they'd known each other forever instead of just 3 days. Okay, Nova, Tom whispered. We're going to do this together. He moved to the young one and found the 4-line. The needle was steady now. Tom had stopped shaking. He administered the treatment, watching the crystalline compound flow into the young one's body. Then he stepped back and waited. Nothing happened for several seconds. Tom's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. Nova's head lifted from his shoulder, and she moved closer to her offspring, watching intently. Then the young one convulsed. What? Art? Tom's stomach dropped. This was it. This was the moment where everything went wrong. Then it convulsed again. But this time was different. This wasn't the weak, dying convulsion of before. This was strong. This was active. This was a body fighting back, mobilizing, waking up. The young one's eyes snapped open. They were brilliant, deep violet with gold flecks, exactly like Nova's but smaller, brighter, filled with the wonder of a creature seeing the world clearly for the first time in days. The creature made a sound, a series of musical notes like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. It was beautiful. It was alive. Nova released a howl that Tom felt in his bones. Not a threatening sound. The opposite. It was pure, raw joy and relief and love and gratitude all wrapped up in a single sound that echoed through the entire station. It was the sound of a mother getting her child back. It was the sound of hope winning. It was the sound of a miracle. Tom was laughing and crying at the same time, unable to form words, unable to do anything but stand there and witness what he'd just helped create. Welcome back, buddy, he finally managed to breathe. Welcome back. Retry him. The week after the breakthrough was strange in ways Tom couldn't quite explain. Nova and her young one didn't leave. They couldn't really. The little one was still recovering, still needed constant monitoring. But more than that, something had shifted between the three of them. Something had moved past the emergency, past the pure survival instinct that had driven those first 72 hours. They were becoming something else. Something like trust. Something like family. It started with Nova trying to communicate. She couldn't speak human language. Her vocal cords made sounds that were too low or too high for Tom's ears to process. But she tried anyway. She'd make these trilling noises, these rhythmic patterns that seemed to carry meaning even if Tom couldn't understand the actual words. She'd pair them with gestures, pointing with one massive clawed hand at her body, then at her young one, then making sweeping motions that seemed to encompass everything beyond the station walls. Tom started to piece it together. Not word by word, but concept by concept. Nova was telling him a story. And it was a story of pain. She showed him scars. Long, deep gouges across her body that had healed into thick lines. She made a gesture like something grabbing her, pulling her, and her whole body went rigid with trauma. She pointed to a scar on her young one. Nova must have gotten that before it was born, and made a sound that was almost like a moan of grief. Tom understood. Her kind was being hunted. Over several days, through a combination of sounds and gestures and Tom's own willingness to sit and listen, Nova communicated the reality of her species' existence. They were prey. Not to any natural predator but to other civilizations. To beings who wanted to capture them for experiments. To hunters who saw them as trophies or slaves or genetic material. To empires that feared them simply for being different. Nova's people were scattered across the galaxy, hunted, desperate, running. But then she made a different gesture. She pointed at Tom, then pressed her massive hand against her chest. She made a trilling sound that seemed almost questioning. Tom understood. She was asking if he was like the others. If he was going to hurt them. No, Tom said firmly. I'm not like that. Nova watched his face, studied his eyes, and then she did something unexpected. She reached out with one claw and very gently, so gently it almost tickled, traced a line down Tom's cheek. Like she was reading him. Like she was trying to understand what was inside him through touch alone. Then she made a soft sound, almost like a purr, and nodded. But Nova wanted to understand Tom too. She noticed him one evening sitting alone on the dock steps, staring out at the darkness between stars. She settled down beside him, her massive form casting a shadow, and made an inquiring sound. Tom found himself talking. Really talking. Telling her about the isolation of this job, about how he'd chosen to work alone out here, how he thought he wanted solitude but really he was just afraid of being let down by people. He told her about failed relationships, about friendships that hadn't survived the distance when he took the station job, about how the work was meaningful but empty, about how fixing ships and machines was easier than fixing connections with other living beings. Nova listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't make judgment sounds. She just listened the way a real friend would. When Tom finished, Nova did something remarkable. She showed him her own scars again, but differently this time. She was showing him that she understood pain. That she knew what it meant to be alone, to be afraid, to be broken. Her scars weren't so different from his invisible ones. Species didn't matter. The hurt was the same. And then the young one arrived. It came toddling over on legs that still weren't completely steady, making those musical wind chime sounds that Nova had named something like lyric. Tom had started approximating it as lyric in his own mind. The little creature was curious about everything, about Tom's tools, about the buttons on his jacket, about his hair. It would follow him around the dock, getting into trouble, squeaking when it did something wrong and immediately looking to Nova to see if it was okay. Tom found himself teaching lyric things. How to hold a wrench without hurting itself. How to recognize which tools were dangerous. Lyric would mimic his movements, its violet eyes bright with concentration, its little claws fumbling with things that were way too big for it. One afternoon, Tom was working on a broken circuit board when he felt Lyric climb into his lap. The young creature settled down, pressing against his chest, making soft purring sounds. Tom's hands froze. He looked at Nova, wondering if this was okay. Nova made a gentle trilling sound and lowered her head, closing her eyes like she was at peace. That's when Tom realized it. The three of them had stopped being separate creatures brought together by accident and circumstance. Somewhere in the last week, they'd become a unit. A weird, impossible cross-species family, but a family nonetheless. Tom had a daughter now. And a mate. And they didn't speak his language and came from somewhere in the stars, but it didn't matter. They were his and he was theirs. When Nova looked at him that night, with Lyric asleep against Tom's chest and the stars wheeling silently overhead, Tom saw something in her amber eyes that he recognized. It was the same thing he felt. It was belonging. It was home. After years of running from connection, Tom had finally found it. Just not in the way he'd expected. The day came when Tom knew it was time. He could feel it in the way Nova moved, in the way she spent long hours looking out at the stars instead of focusing on the dock. Lyric was strong now, fully recovered, practically bouncing off the walls with energy and curiosity. The little creature didn't need Tom's medical interventions anymore. It didn't need the 4 drips or the careful monitoring or the synthetic compounds mixed in precise ratios. It needed the stars. It needed to go home. Tom had known this moment was coming since the day Lyric opened its eyes. He'd known it intellectually, understood it completely. But knowing something and feeling it are two different things. Knowing it didn't stop the ache that started in his chest when Nova began gathering their things, when she started making preparations for departure. The night before they left, Tom sat with Nova on the dock, watching the darkness stretch out infinitely before them. Lyric was asleep in the ship, exhausted from playing and exploring. It was just the two of them, and Tom wanted to say so many things but had no words that would bridge the distance between species. "I'm going to miss you," he said finally, knowing Nova couldn't understand the exact words but hoping she'd understand the feeling behind them. "Both of you. More than I can say." Nova made a soft sound and pressed her head against his shoulder one more time. She'd done this dozens of times over the past week, but this time it felt different. This time it felt like goodbye. That's when she did something Tom wasn't expecting. Nova reached up with one massive claw and carefully, so carefully, pulled something free from between her scales. It was a stone about the size of Tom's fist, and it shimmered with an inner light. The surface was smooth and warm to the touch, and it hummed, actually hummed, with a frequency that Tom felt in his bones. "What is this?" Tom whispered, turning it over in his hands. Nova made a series of trilling sounds, urgent and meaningful. She pressed the stone into Tom's hands and closed his fingers around it. Then she placed her own massive hand over his, and Tom understood. This wasn't just a gift. This was something more. This was a connection. A promise. A message being sent across the vast distances between stars. When Tom looked into Nova's amber eyes, he saw it all. He saw her hope that they would meet again. He saw her gratitude for what he'd done. He saw her love, not romantic but deep and profound, the kind of love that only comes from shared survival and shared trust. And he saw something else. Something like an invitation. "Is this so I can find you?" Tom asked. "Or so you can find me?" Nova trilled softly and touched the stone one more time. Then she turned away, her massive form moving toward the ship with purpose and finality. Tom wanted to ask her to stay. He wanted to beg her not to go. But he didn't. Because that would be selfish, and what he felt for her and Lyric wasn't selfish. It was love, and love meant letting go. Love meant wanting what was best for them, even if it meant standing alone on a dock in the middle of nowhere, watching them fly away. The ship's engines powered up with a low rumble that shook through Tom's entire body. Nova appeared in the viewport one last time, and she raised one claw in a gesture that Tom understood perfectly. It was a farewell. It was a promise. It was, "Until we meet again." The ship lifted off slowly, majestically, climbing up through the station's docking zone and toward the open space beyond. Tom watched it rise, the stone gripped so tightly in his hand that his knuckles turned white. He didn't blink. He didn't move. He just watched until the ship was nothing but a point of light among infinite other points of light, and then it was gone. Tom stood there for a long time after that. Hours maybe. He wasn't sure. The stone in his hand continued to hum, warm against his skin, and somehow that warmth was the only thing keeping Tom from falling completely apart. But something unexpected happened. 3 weeks later, another ship arrived. Not one Tom recognized. It approached carefully, cautiously, like whoever was piloting it wasn't sure if they'd be welcomed. Tom grabbed his emergency beacon, ready to call security, but something stopped him. Something about the way the ship moved felt familiar. The airlock opened and a creature emerged. Different from Nova, smaller, with scales of silver instead of blue-black. But those eyes, those intelligent, desperate eyes were the same. Behind it came two smaller creatures, barely moving, clearly injured. The alien made a sound that sounded almost like a question. And Tom understood. It was asking, "Are you the human? Are you the one who helped?" Tom's hands started shaking as he realized what was happening. Nova had done it. She'd spread the word. She'd sent a message through whatever networks existed out there among the hunted, the desperate and the displaced. She'd sent word that there was a human. One human who didn't hunt. Who didn't fear. Who helped. "Yeah," Tom said, stepping forward with his medical scanner already in hand. "Yeah, I'm the one. Let me see what we can do." Over the next months, the visitors kept coming. Creatures Tom had never seen before, some injured, some sick, some just needing sanctuary. And Tom helped them all. He fixed broken bodies the way he fixed broken machines. He showed them compassion when they'd only known cruelty. He proved over and over again that humans could be different. That not all sapient beings feared what was alien. That across the vastness of space, understanding could bridge any gap. Other repair technicians heard about what was happening at Station 7 and started joining him. Humans from other outposts, other stations, People who wanted to be part of something bigger than themselves. They created a network. A sanctuary. A place where hunted beings could come and be healed, be safe, be seen as valuable instead of as threats or experiments or prey. Tom held the stone Nova had given him every night, feeling its warmth, listening to its hum. And he understood that his life had changed on the day she'd crashed into his dock. He'd gone from being a solitary mechanic fixing ships to being something far more important. He'd become a bridge between worlds. A proof that kindness could transcend species. A light in the darkness for beings who'd only known fear and pain. And somewhere out there among the stars, Nova flew with her healthy young one, spreading word to her kind. There was a human who cared. There was hope. There was a place to go when everything else had failed. The station hummed with activity now, filled with life and purpose and meaning. And Tom, standing in his repair dock with another injured alien before him, finally understood what home really was. It wasn't a place. It was a purpose. And his purpose had finally found him.